Welcome, 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 y'all. I am so excited. Y'all just don't know. Abigail and I were just praying before this started, and the butterflies are just in my stomach already because I'm so excited to be interviewing her. She is an author and an artist, and I also call her my friend. Abigail is amazing. We actually met in 2018. That was the first time we met in life, in person, and got a chance to hug each other. That was 2018 at the Declare Conference, which was a conference for Christian communicators. And so it's writers and bloggers and vloggers and authors who were there at this conference and speakers. And I just remember meeting her. She's a hugger like me, so we hugged, and it was like our bond just started right from there, even though, like, we had kind of been like online friends before that, but that was the first time we really got to meet in person. And ever since then, she has been a blessing to my life, and she has inspired me so much by now publishing her first book. So very excited, and I'm gonna stop babbling and I'm going to actually ask Abigail if you would introduce yourself and maybe share a little bit about your story.
Aired. Jamila, thank you for having me on your YouTube channel to share my new book with your audience. As Jamila said, my name is Abigail Brown, and I have been living with a condition called dystonia for 28 years. This condition has changed not only my life, but also my family's life. It was in May 1996 when I began suffering from the effects of an undiagnosed case of Rocky Mountain spotty fever. My parents rushed me to the nearest hospital. There, I was in a drug-induced coma for a week. When I began to wake up, my muscles were tight, with my arms pulled up to my body. My legs were rigid. I could not move, could not talk, swallow, eat, turn over, or even scratch. My parents told me I cried and screamed constantly. A feeding tube was put in place. Then I was transferred to a rehabilitation center. While in rehab, my speech and language pathologist was talking to me about the alphabet blocks. She was lining up on the floor in front of my wheelchair. She asked me my name and age. My arms were still drawn up to my chest. But with my left foot and great effort and determination, I pointed to the letters, slowly spelling out my name, Abby, and pointed to the number 3. The therapist continued to ask me my older sister's name and age and my parents' names, and I spelled them all. My cognitive abilities were undamaged. My parents were ecstatic and hopeful about the future. When I was 5 years old, my parents discovered that the brain trauma I experienced led to the development of dystonia, a condition which causes muscles to tighten and the body to contort in different ways. Currently, there is no cure for dystonia, though I have undergone numerous surgeries and procedures to alleviate some of the more painful and debilitating symptoms. I grew up learning to communicate with others with several different communication devices throughout the years. I'm very thankful for the progress of technology in my life. I am talking to you today with an app on my iPhone.
That's so awesome. I just love it's I love that you can communicate because you have so much to say. And even though I've heard you share your story before, it's every time I listen to it, and as I was reading it in your book, it just really touched me. Can you tell us what inspired you to actually write this book and name it Unstuck?
The concept of Unstuck came from preparing to speak at a ladies' meeting. I was typing out what I was going to say. I know you have been invited to speak at events. I don't know if this happens to you or not, but when I'm preparing for something in advance, my mind starts wandering. Does this happen to you?
Oh, yeah. Every time.
Anyways, as I was typing this devotion out in advance, I kept having a thought coming up in my head. The thought was, how can I get unstuck from the sandpit of self-pity? So I wrote it down in my notes app because it sounded like a good title for something. It was later that October of 2021, I created the acronym using the word Unstuck.
Wow.
My book coach and I tweaked it and polished it, and each statement became the chapter titles for the book. Chapter 1 is Untangle the Patterns of Blame. Chapter 2 is Notice the Blessings God has given you. Chapter 3 is Speak Truth to Yourself. Chapter 4 is Transform Your Thinking. Chapter 5 is Understanding God is with me.
Yes.
Chapter 6 is Crush Comparison and Complaining. And lastly, Chapter 7 is Know Your Purpose.
Oof.
I want my book cover to have movement in it and grab the reader's attention. My cover is one of my abstract paintings. I painted in 2016. When I was painting it back then, I didn't know what I'd ever use it for. But I loved how the layers of paint blended together.
Wow.
When I first saw my book cover, I couldn't stop smiling. When I revealed my bright cover on social media, my friends commented on how beautiful and moving it was. They entitled the painting, Hope.
I love that. And I love what you said about the layers of paint overlapping each other. And it's almost like they were stuck together in these different layers that you have to become unstuck from. And I love the acronym. I love that how it corresponds to the chapters in the book. Like when I read books and I hear that story or that background, it also makes me just so happy because you can see God in it, like helping you through your writing. I love that. Now, wanted to ask you, is your book only for those with disabilities, or can anyone who's struggling resentment, read this and get something out of it?
I wrote this book because I found myself stuck in resentment.
Mm-hmm.
I struggled seeing this at first when I was writing the book. I think I cried the most writing chapters 1, 3, and 6. Just when I thought I couldn't cry anymore, I would start to cry again. These chapters were hard to write because I knew I struggled with blaming others, speaking truth to myself, and I struggle with comparison and complaining. So I had to write from my experience living with dystonia. I know I'm not the only one who struggles with these things. Everyone, whether they want to admit it or not, struggles with resentment in some area of their life.
Yep.
I will say, it's not a very enjoyable topic to look into when you are struggling with it. But if you get alone with the Lord, He will show you what you need to correct in your life. The purpose of Unstuck is to reach people who feel stuck, either emotionally, physically, or spiritually, and invite them to move towards resilience in the Lord.
Yes, yes, yes. I love that because too, it was important to me to ask that question because sometimes when you write a book from your personal perspective, people think that it's not for them because they don't, have the exact same struggle that you do. But if I've learned anything through Loved and Blessed and me sharing my infertility story, it's that even women who haven't struggled with infertility, they can relate to having to submit to God's will and loving the Lord, whether He does things the way you want Him to or not. And so I loved your book. You mentioned throughout your book that you journal, and that's definitely a way that I really work through my own feelings and emotions. And so Was journaling a tool that really helped you uncover some of those unhealthy thought patterns that you kind of mentioned throughout the book?
My Christian life coach taught me the thought model, which is a very interesting tool to use when you are journaling. I don't know if you are familiar with the thought model or not, but it starts with a specific circumstance in your life. For example, I remember one time my circumstance was staying at home on Friday nights. And my thought about that circumstance at the time was I'm stuck.
Yeah.
And my feeling about that thought was disappointment. And my actions were annoyed with my parents, stayed in my room, and I didn't spend time with my parents. So guess what my result was? It's so funny and profound at the same time. My result was, I'm stuck at home. What I just walked you through was an unintentional thought model. But there's also an intentional thought model. And this time, you have to pick a different thought. A thought that seems doable about the circumstance. And you go through the same process. You choose how you feel when you think a certain thought. Then feelings produce actions, and then you get your result. Mentioned in the book, it took me a while to really figure out what I was feeling. My life coach was so patient with me. I was frustrated most sessions. The thought model didn't make sense to me at first. It might have been because I was so bogged down in what others could do faster, easier, or better than me. I had to retrain my brain and learn to think good and lovely thoughts again, which took time, but it was time well spent.
So you shared that you typed this entire book using your left thumb. That, when I read that, I speechless, honestly. Your experience writing this book is honestly a testimony in and of itself. It is just, I am so inspired by you. What did you learn about your faith, God's faithfulness, and your own resilience during this writing process?
I learned that the Lord has been patient and continues to be patient with me. This has been something I knew I was supposed to write 4 years ago or more. I was scared of what others would think about what I wrote. I thought I wasn't a good writer, and I knew it wasn't going to be easy. But these were all things the Lord helped me work through during the writing process. When the words weren't flowing, or when my mind was so busy that I couldn't think of where to start, I would remind myself tomorrow is a new day. On other days, I would set time aside to write, and I would decide, I'm just gonna start typing. And I would do it and get something written down. In the end, I just needed to focus on what the Lord has called me to do. I learned to trust His timing. Worship music and listening to Bible teaching and inspiring podcasts and speakers kept my focus on Jesus and helped me keep going. At times, when I was struggling to type about a certain topic, God would bring me into a situation that directly related to the chapter. I couldn't find the stories or words to complete the week before. I suddenly realized I had a lot to write about. I remember praying and asking the Lord to help me remember these specific moments that would go perfectly in the section I was working on. And I jot down the highlights of that moment in the Notes app on my phone. What most people don't know is I wrote this entire chapters in the Notes app on my phone. Then when I was done with a chapter, I would copy and paste it into my manuscript in Google Docs. It was just easier for me to do it that way.
Wow. Wow. I mean, just, I love hearing that behind the scenes of your process. And you talk about the path to resentment, sometimes starting with the why me and what if questions. Do you think these types of thoughts ever completely go away? Or can we be kind of content with our lives and trust God while still wondering about if things had, turned out differently?
No, I don't think these thoughts ever really go away, but they can fade into the background of our minds. Because once we start to identify the lies we tell ourselves, then we can become aware and can ask ourselves, is that really what I want to speak over myself? That's when we can decide to think a different thought. I'm not saying you can't grieve, because I have been through seasons of grieving, living with dystonia.
Yeah.
And you know what I've always found? That the Lord will meet you in your grief. One of the names of God is the man of sorrows. Jesus understands what we are feeling. He knows it's not comfortable. Can we be content and still have questions about how things turned out in life? Yes, I believe we can. Paul got depressed and asked questions, and he learned to be content with little that he had at times, and the abundance he had at other times.
Yeah.
David was a man after God's own heart, and he had tons of questions. And many others who were in the Bible who went through difficult times and had questions and learned to trust God through their circumstances.
I 100% agree with you. And Paul is definitely, I read about him and his struggles and his contentment that he found constantly when I find myself struggling too. I could also really relate to the part where you talk about the difference in the help we receive when we like physically fall, which I tend to do a lot because I'm kind of a klutz and walk into things all the time, versus when we are spiritually falling. Can you talk about that a little bit more and maybe share a tip on what we can do when we notice ourselves spiritually falling?
Sometimes when people tell me what they are struggling with spiritually or physically, I have learned to listen to them because not everyone wants a solution to their problem. And many times I don't say much. I just try to be present and set aside time to pray for them during the week or when they come to my mind.
Yeah, that's huge. That I've had to learn that not everybody, even when people come to you, like you said, for to share their problems, some people just want you to listen. Some people say that they want, maybe some godly advice, but they don't actually really want it. They think they do until you give it to them. So I can also relate to that too. So when I am reading a book, especially for my spiritual growth, I know it's really a good book when there are just as many uplifting moments and, uplifting kind of aha moments as there are those ouch moments where I'm like, oh gosh. Ouch moments for me are when the author says something that really convicts my spirit, and it convicts me of a tough truth, but with love. And so one of my favorite ouch moments of your book was when you asked if I was guaranteed to become a living illustration of the thoughts in my head, would I like what I see? Woo, that was a good question. Can you talk more about the verse that inspired that question, which I believe was Proverbs 23:7, and what your answer was when you asked this question to yourself?
Chapter 3 was an ouch moment for me also. Proverbs 23:7 states, "For as he thinks in his heart, so is he. Eat and drink. He says to you, but his heart is not with you." Struggle with speaking truth to myself, and have struggled with it since I was a little kid. And as I wrote and thought about this chapter, I thought how sad my story was growing up which really didn't help much, because every time I'd cry, I couldn't see to type. Meditating on things that seemed unfair in my life really didn't help or produce much writing most days. But when I thought about how the Lord is going to use what I went through and what I'm still continuing to learn, it helped me see his faithfulness throughout my life.
That's so good. That's so good. You talk about how we can also reframe the thought that so many of us have, that no one understands what I go through. The number of times I have thought that and had to stop myself. What do you do to combat that thought when it pops into your head?
I have to remember that there are others living with dystonia and who have struggled with it far worse than I do. When I think no one understands what I go through, it's usually because someone has said something that makes me feel insecure or hurt. Once I realize it's a comment that is causing discomfort and distress, I can decide to think a helpful thought about the person who made the comment. Like, it's okay if this person doesn't understand how things go in my life. I don't understand what they go through either.
I can 100% relate to the challenge of understanding how something unexpected in your life that is so hard also can be something that works in your favor. Something that God allowed to happen for your good. What advice do you have for people who are trying to understand how their testimony, their challenges, and their triumphs are related to God's purpose for their lives?
God loves you very much. He is close to the broken, hearted, and hurting. He cares for you. Know this, that whatever you go through in life, you, my friend, can trust. God will see you through. It may seem difficult right now, but the Lord sees you and is smiling down on you, giving you the strength and grace you need every single day. Hold fast to the truth that His plan for your life is filled with purpose and meaning. Embrace the journey with confidence, knowing that He is with you. So continue boldly walking in your purpose, experiencing continual transformation into the image of Christ.
Yes, yes, yes. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I know that's going to encourage some people. Abigail, I could talk to you all day about your book because the whole thing, there was so many things that that just inspired me, and I love how interactive it is. So it's not just reading; you have worksheets in there that people can actually apply what they're reading and really do a kind of more of a deep dive into thinking it through. So I love how you put that together. How can people buy your book? And then also you talked about how you created the artwork for your cover. How can people, see your artwork and connect with you?
People can buy my book on Amazon. I decided to take a break from painting when I started writing my book. I hope to get back to it soon, though. I do sell note cards with my artwork on them, and you can find those at silent-inspirations.com. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram under @Abigail Brown Writes.
Awesome. Okay, so everybody's watching this video, definitely check the description box below and you will be able to find links to all of those places that Abigail mentioned. Please follow her on Instagram. Please go buy her book. As we are recording right this second, it is pre-sale, so you can do your pre-order through the link that will be below. But also, if you are watching this video a year after it is filmed, go buy her book on Amazon. It will bless your soul. Thank you, Abigail, for taking time to chat with me and and just sharing all of this inspiration and also just encouraging people. You are a fellow encourager, so I appreciate how you are encouraging people with your story. So thank you, thank you, thank you for chatting with me today.
Thank you so much.